This is my take on the Panasonic 42.5mm f1.2 lens for Micro Four Thirds cameras. It's the equivalent of the 85mm portrait lens for 35mm and full frame cameras, and as such a focal length that most photographers will find good use for. The reason for its popularity is twofold. Firstly, the 24-degree horizontal angle of view gives a working distance for portraiture that keeps you far enough from your subject to give a nice drawing of facial features, but not so far that it can't be used in a normal room. Secondly, it is an ideal focal length for a wide aperture lens, making it good for indoor use in low light and in and out of doors for dealing with intrusive backgrounds. The sharpness and potential shallow depth of field of such lenses has made them a favourite with professional and expert enthusiasts since the early days of photography. Every camera mark tries to include such a lens in its armoury, though up to now Micro Four Thirds users have only had the beautiful little Olympus 45mm f1.8 among the native lenses to cover their high speed needs at this focal length. Then along came Panasonic with their version of this classic lens. It could hardly contrast more with Olympus's small, light and inexpensive lens in that the 42.5 f1.2 is big, heavy and expensive. Let's take a look. You know this lens is special the moment you take it out of the box. It reminds me of the old Leica lenses that felt like they were made out of a metal sleeve filled with solid glass, and it has a similar sense of presence. This is not just any old lens. It is even heavier than it looks at 425 grams, or just under a pound in weight. Bear in mind though that the Canon full frame equivalent of this Nocticron weighs 2.5 times as much, so we are talking comparatively heavy. Here it is with a Panasonic 14-140, and then the 12-35mm f2.8, both big lenses by Micro Four Thirds standards. There is an aperture ring at the front with a detente in the positions 1.4 and 1.8, which marks where most lenses have their maximum apertures. Showing this to friends, I felt like Spinal Tap guitar player Nigel Tufnell. No, this one goes to f1.2. There's an autofocus on-off switch and an on-off for the stabilisation, and a screw-secured metal lens hood that fits back over the lens when not in use. I'm always surprised by the depth of lens hoods for primes and how effective it makes them. The focusing ring is ideally placed and of the silky smooth variety that, along with the shallow depth of field, makes the lens supremely easy to manual focus. Back in film days, apart from low light capabilities, wide aperture lenses were prized for their ability to snap in and out of focus and the brightness of the viewfinder image, which facilitated the focusing. Today, with autofocus and electronic viewfinders, the main reason such a lens is prized is for its low light capability and shallow depth of field effect. But there's more still, because it maximises your camera's autofocus speed. And there's more even than just performance. That big hunk of glass on the front of your camera, it just shouts, I am a serious photographer, doesn't it? So, it looks serious, is it? Yes, it's deadly serious. All the pictures I took with this lens for this review are at f1.2. I start calling lenses fast at anything wider than f2.8. This lens is a full 2.5 stops faster than that. It is sharp enough across the frame at open aperture in general purpose photography for you not to need to stop down unless you want more depth of field. If you do stop down, it gets even sharper right across the frame. I quite like the look of the aperture ring on the front of the lens, but I found myself setting it to A and using the rear wheel as I'm used to doing. On the front of a larger M43 camera, like the Olympus EM1 or Panasonic GH4 that I use, it has a very natural balance and grip. Surprisingly, that feeling carries over to the GX7 size bodies, though unsurprisingly it feels a bit gross on the little GM1. I think if you had one of these, you'd have to invest in a set of neutral density filters, essential for video with slow shutter speeds, but even for stills you can find yourself running out of shutter speeds fast enough to enable apertures like f1.2. The filters are 67mm, so they won't be cheap. Used at open aperture for portraits, focus has to be absolutely dead on, and that's where a camera with face recognition and eye detection really comes into its own. For general work, pinpoint focus starts to really show its worth too. Even though the focus accuracy of MFT cameras is 100%, you still have to tell the camera where you want to focus, and at f1.2 near enough is not good enough. Here's a portrait with AF mode set to one area, a small square in the centre of the frame. It's focused on the mouth. Roy's eye is out of focus. Here's a shot with face eye recognition on. It's bang on Dave's near eye. On the original you can see that his far eye is well out of focus. Sharpness wise, as I said, this lens is impeccable. Most ultra high speed lenses are optically compromised at wide apertures, but this one is as near faultless as I'm ever likely to see. Even at f1.2, vignetting isn't a problem. Distortion is unnoticeable, purple fringing is minimal, and in spite of the big chunk of glass at the front, it doesn't flare. And on stopping down, it just gets better, can you believe? Nothing can be that perfect. It must be a secret drinker or smoke or something when it's not in use. At f1.2, it has similar sharpness in the centre to my prized little Olympus 45mm f1.8 at f1.8, and the edge seems a bit better. By f2.8 and beyond, both lenses seem identical to me, so the Panasonic really does need to be used at f2 and wider to earn its keep. Whatever, it is very, very sharp. Here's the focus speed with the GH4. This is copybook stuff. Here's the eye tracking. Ditto. These shots of a local mog chasing a laser pen spot are wide open, f1.2, ISO 3200 and 125th of a second. At a more normal ISO 200 with an f2.8 lens wide open, that would translate to a shutter speed of around half a second. That translates to dim, very dim light. That any of these shots are sharp is amazing. That 2 and 3 of them were, beyond amazing. Summing up this lens is difficult because it is hard not to be dazzled by it. It makes pictures for you. Look at this silver-haired lady chatting to a friend. She's in a typically messy and distracting urban background. I walked up and took shots off the cuff with no attempt to find a better background. Distracting background? What distracting background? This Nocticron gives you the freedom to see a shot, walk right up and nail it, lifted like 3D from the background. It's a great thing to be able to do. As for the sharpness, whether anyone needs the level of sharpness of this lens at f4 and 5.6, I don't know. But you can always soften detail in a picture if you don't want it, whereas you can't add it if it isn't there. I've compared it to the Olympus 45mm. At 1/6 of the price, it's not a fair comparison. But for anyone looking for a native M4 fast lens of this focal length, those are the choices. Here's a comparison of the background diffusing qualities of the two lenses. Is the difference and a stop extra speed worth a 600% price premium? That's the question. My answer would be yes, until I took its size and weight into account. It is big and represents the antithesis of why I moved to M43 cameras. I bought into the system knowing that there were compromises to be made in return for portability. If I try to overcome these compromises and in doing so diminish the portability, what was the point of changing? This lens tips the balance a little too far the wrong way for my taste. For someone else, it may be a reasonable trade-off. If someone gave me this Nocticron, I'd keep it for the rest of my life, and I'd most likely take some of my best pictures with it, and I'd certainly continue to love using it. It represents the ultimate in Micro Four Thirds lens design and performance, and is a pleasure to use. I'm slightly in awe of the fact that a lens this close to perfect can be made at all. If you regularly work in the lowest light, in a studio, or want the very shallowest depth of field, combined with razor-sharp results, this lens is essential. If you're a professional, you ought to have one. Me, I'll just stick with my 45mm Olympus, which is not too far short of it in performance, and comes in at a quarter the weight and 1/6 the price. This Nocticron is a star. And there's always a premium to be paid for star quality. I'd argue that in this case it's actually a superstar, but it's just a slightly overweight one. Thanks to ephotozine.com for the loan of the lens, and thanks for watching.